All right, welcome everyone to a meeting of the Athens-Clarke County Mayor and Commission here on Thursday, December 10th, 2020. And we're gathered tonight for a couple purposes. We have a special called executive session for purposes of personnel and real estate acquisition or disposal. And then we will, prior to that, have a conversation about tiering or sequencing of what projects will be done in what years for SPLOST 2020. To enter into executive session, no, I'm going to ask the clerk to call roll.
Davenport.
Here.
Parker.
Here.
Blake.
Here.
Wright. Denson.
Here.
Tool.
Here.
Edwards. Harrod.
Here.
Thornton. Handy.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. All right, I will entertain a motion to enter into executive session upon conclusion of the work session.
So moved. So moved.
Second.
All right, I think I had a motion from Commissioner Houle, second from Commissioner Parker. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. And then I'm actually going to ask for a motion to adjourn executive session at the conclusion of that session.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I've got a motion from Commissioner Hamby and a second from Commissioner Davenport. All in favor of adjourning at the end of our executive session?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? All right. Well, for the bulk of today, we are going to be having a conversation about our SPLOST 2020 package, which we know 13 months ago was approved by the voters. And we've begun to collect pennies, but have to make the challenging decision of which projects will be completed in which year. And for the sort of purpose of ease of sort of understanding the breadth of the program that'll last for almost 12 years, it's been broken into quarters with 3 fiscal years in each quarter. And so Capital Projects Director Robert Cheshire has created 3 alternatives as a starting point for conversation. And he is going to take us through, I think, high level of some of the questions that we had in earlier conversation, particularly around bond financing for projects and what that means, both in terms of when we pay that money back and when we have to conclude repayment of that money. And then we're going to get into the nuts and bolts of the prospective tiering spreadsheets. So, Blaine, I'll turn it over to you if you want to introduce anything else before Robert.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. Good evening, commissioners and others, staff joining us tonight. So the purpose of tonight is, as the mayor laid out, come back with some responses to some earlier questions and show you some different scenarios. It would be great if we came out on the other end of this evening with a plan, but this is a pretty intricate puzzle, if you will. And so at the very least, we are going to be all ears listening to your questions and feedback. And it could be that we end tonight without any single resolution, but that staff would come back, in the form of agenda report in the cycle that tries to solve it and reflect as much as we've heard that is something that works. And then, of course, just like with all actions of the commission, you have the ability to change that, agenda item to suit the purposes of the consensus. So we're here tonight to spend the time that we need to give you the answers you need and get feedback from you that's meaningful, and then staff will try to present a workable plan to everyone in the wake of the meeting. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert Cheshire, our Capital Projects Director, to walk us through a presentation and entertain some questions.
Thank you, Blaine. Can you hear me okay? Good. Just want to make sure. Let me share. Good evening, everybody. Okay. Well, obviously, as y'all know, this is a continuation of a couple of months of us working on a process of establishing the SPLOST 2020 tier funding schedule. And Blaine alluded to this, but this evening, to help make this session more productive and to help us hopefully answer some of your questions directly and quicker than we did at the last work session, which I thought, maybe got me off track a little bit or got us off track. And I'm going to try to help you with that and prevent that again tonight. So I've invited a few of the directors that have projects in the tier in the SPLOST 2020, but also included in the directors, there's some additional staff from finance, and have two other people that are outside of Athens-Clarke County staff, and that's going to be Tom Woodward, who is with First Tryon. He is one of the financial advisors for Athens-Clarke County, and then also Ben Brooks, who's an attorney who's a specialist in SPLOST. And I know some of the questions we had last time, I thought it would have been better had I had some of them on here. So they are here tonight, and I really want to thank them for participating in this, and look forward to some of their answers and some of the responses that they're going to give. So this evening, as far as an agenda goes, we're going to do go through some of the facts again. Some of these are reiterations or just reminders, but I think they're important to reiterate to make sure that we're on the right track tonight. We're going to talk about some of the facts regarding the general obligation bond debt service. Then we're going to talk about some of the factors, again, that impact the tier funding schedule. And tonight, what I'm looking for, and the mayor's alluded to it, and Blaine has mentioned it as well, and that's some general guidance from the mayor and commission to help us as we finalize this tier funding schedule. And hopefully, a goal would be to get it in front of you in January for a vote. But we'll do whatever we need to do to delay it if we have to. We want this to be right and everybody to feel good about it. And then we're actually going to go into 3 scenarios. I'm not going to necessarily call them, they're not really options because they're not balanced, but they're scenarios that give us starting points to work from. So that's going to be a little bit of an exercise to hear that from y'all. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with next step and any additional questions that maybe we don't get during the presentation and the exercise. So what are some of the facts regarding the general obligation bond debt service? Just as a reminder, the maximum as per the referendum that was passed would be that we could issue up to $127 million in bonds and general obligation bonds. And we've already issued the first ones, roughly $32 million, that were spread out amongst projects 1, 2, and 3, the big 3. And then the accountants that are listening in won't like the way that I worded this particular sentence, but I've tried to generalize it so people like myself can understand this. What this is saying is, by the time we pay back the $127 million in general obligation bonds, the net interest that we pay, because we're actually getting some upfront money that's not associated with the bond itself. It is a premium that allows us to get a certain interest rate from where we're borrowing from. So the easiest way for me to explain, for the $127 million, we net roughly have to pay an interest of roughly $10 million. So that just kind of gives you that's for context. And then finally, I think 2 really important items, and these are more responses to some of the questions that we had during the last work session, and that is the debt repayment has to be completed by 2030. So keeping that in mind, you say, well, let's wait and issue the last bonds in FY23, FY24. Well, they have to be completely paid back by 2030. So the farther we put it off, that means that the more that we'd have to repay in any given year. And actually, that's why I put bullet point 4 on here, also set by the referendum, is the fact that there are limits, and there's a schedule in the referendum, and there are limits, maximum limits that we can pay back as far as principal goes in any given year. So we can't do a balloon payment at the end. We can't lessen those payments and then pay over those amounts at the end. We are structured, and there's a threshold that we can do. So as we go, what you're going to see on the 3 spreadsheets that I'm going to show in a minute is our recommendation based on the information that we have from finance and from the financial advisors, and the way that I'm hearing that you would like the projects to go would be that we issue the remainder of the bonds in FY22. So that's going to be July. The upcoming July is when FY22 is going to start. So that's the 3 tiers. I wanted to go ahead and say that in case I forget to say it later on the spreadsheets themselves. So what are some of the factors? And you heard, excuse me?
Kelly, you mind if I ask a question about that real quick?
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Okay, thank you. So, Robert, I hear what you're saying about paying it off and at 2030 is the last date, but on your spreadsheet, you've got one row there that you're paying on each scenarios. The debt service project is, you've got $6 million listed in FY32. Can you tell me why, if it's got to pay off by F30, why is that $6 million there, I guess?
I'm looking for the 6 million. So hold on just a second.
It's project number 4, and it's on the very last column in quarter 4.
Oh yeah, that actually is, and Patty, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that is actually interest. I mean, potentially interest earned. Is that correct, Patty?
If everybody remembers correctly, Project 4 was set aside to help cover a cost of the debt of the interest. So $16 million was set aside to help pay for the interest. If we, depending on what we've got here in the debt service payments, we should have about $6 million left. Because if you remember in the last slide, it said approximately net 10 million in interest. We should have a little bit of savings in that project. So of course we won't know until we actually have the firm debt service payments. But right now, the way we're gauging everything, we are hoping to have a little bit of money left over in that project and available to reallocate somewhere else. So that money that's sitting there, the reason I put it all the way to the end is because we won't know until closer to the end of the program how much money we're actually going to have left over in that project.
Right. I guess it looks like an expense the way it's laid out here.
Yes, sir.
Instead of a revenue.
Yeah,
Right.
it's just money that's available in the project. And I put it at the end because we don't anticipate having to spend that. We hope it will be available to move somewhere else.
And I'm going to explain this spreadsheet in a minute. But if you look at the top, there's debt service repayment number 1 and debt service repayment number 2. Number 1 is the one that the bonds that were issued in FY20. And then number 2 is what I was saying, to issue the remainder in FY22. And if you'll see those two lines, they end in 2030.
Yeah, no, I see that, but I was just catching that number 4.
Absolutely.
Looks,
Yep. Good question.
thought it was an expense.
Thanks. So these factors we've talked about a little bit. Some of these we talked about before, but I thought they were important to reiterate. And that was that the budgets for projects 01, 02, and 03, which of course is the facility, space modernization, the affordable housing, and also the Classic Center Arena, will encumber approximately 50% of the anticipated collection. So it's just important to see the weight of those and the amount that those encumber. And of course, any large encumbrances, whether it's those 3 or we do something different, any of those large encumbrances in the early years, and you'll see it on the spreadsheet as we go through the exercise, obviously and significantly impacts the projects, the scheduling, but also potentially the scope of the projects that are in the latter years. And of course, the debt service, once we initiate those, comes off the top. And I've heard David and I've heard Patty both say that that's the first fruit that starts kicking in, and you've got to pay that first in every year. And then finally, of course, it's a no-brainer, but the more interest that we pay, the less money that's going to be available for those projects that we want to do. So what are we looking for tonight? Really some if we could dial down and get some really tight answers, that would be great. But if as a minimum, I'd like to get some general guidance, if possible, from the mayor and commission. It would be these 3 bullet points, which would be: do we initiate project 1, facility space modernization, in FY21? And then also, which of the projects, and you'll see in a second what 13 through 35 are, which projects do you absolutely want to see in the first quarter? I'm going to probably use the terms front loaded sometimes, but then the first few years of the 12-year SPLOST program. And then, and this one will make sense to you in a minute too, but do you agree with the funding distribution that I've shown in the 3 sustainability projects? And one of the things that I heard certainly loud and clear, and it made a lot of sense, would be that those three projects, primarily I'm talking about renewable energy, that those get more than what I was showing when I showed that was roughly balanced distribution tier funding schedule. I believe it was at the last work session. So you're going to see. So I'd like to see if we agree, or y'all agree, that that funding is adequate as the way that I'm showing it. Anything before we get into the actual exercises? Questions? Anything from maybe some of the directors or the others that I've got on here? Anything that to clarify before we get into the spreadsheets? Just unmute yourself and speak up.
I have a quick question.
Okay.
And I watched the work session, but I wasn't actually part of this body the last time that y'all talked about this. So forgive me if this was already covered. But if and when we take another bond issuance, does that have to be tied specifically to the facility space modernization project, or can the money from that also go to the other projects?
The general obligation bond money can go toward any of the projects.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, thanks for the question.
Well, just to clarify, but those purposes for which the monies will be spent in the bond offering are declared at that time. So, Commissioner Hull, just to say, if you said you in the bonds that you sold them for the sustainability projects, you couldn't then use them, say, for the library. I mean, you got to be clear on what you're borrowing the funds for. It's my understanding.
Okay, and we also could use them for the library or any other project, essentially.
Yeah, any of the projects that are out there, you could borrow funds against, and there are some limitations as to obviously how much and when you can initiate those bond offerings, but any of the SPLOST projects are eligible for that, is my understanding. Mr. Cheshire?
That was mine as well. Thanks.
This is Mike. If I could point out one thing, piggybacking on what Jesse's talking about. I think with the facility space modernization project, if that, because I know that's got like two components to it, the judicial center and the courthouse. And, certainly you've got to build the judicial center first before you start doing anything on the courthouse. So perhaps if that were broken out, I think it was about 10 million for the courthouse renovations if I'm not I can't remember the amount, but if that were broken
that's
out,
great.
that might get a bit easier to look at that as far as bond issuance for the judicial center, but maybe look at regular SPLOST for doing the courthouse renovations.
And you'll see that on the spreadsheet. We'll go ahead and pull those up. Patty, you want to let me stop sharing? Okay. And I know this is tiny. We practiced several times to try to get this maximized and based it off of working from laptops. So I know I heard one of you say you have your magnifying glass, and I apologize. It's so important though, and we can zoom in. So we can zoom in. If you say you can't see something in particular, we'll zoom in. But it's so important to be able to see the whole picture. But I'm going to start on this. Okay, let me just take a second. The mayor said this. I think it's important to understand what you're seeing here. I see it every day, and but you're seeing it just for a few minutes every month. So again, the colors, we went ahead and took the 12 years, broke it into 4 quarters, 3 in each. I think that makes it a little easier to talk about moving things up and back. The very top is your balance that rolls over each year if there is a balance. The projected revenue comes from finance. You'll see some escalation in every year from starting in tier 1, 24,500,000 to 29,000,009. We tried to simplify this from the last work session that we had. We changed it around a little bit to make the debt service a little easier to read, but the debt service on the general obligation bonds, repayment 1, again, that's what's already been issued, and this is the repayment principal and interest are combined here, started already in FY20. Debt service 2 is us estimating, and at least these spreadsheets are based on issuing the remainder of those general obligation bonds in FY22. So that's why you see the repayment starting here. And then we have the total project SPLOST expenditures are not only your debt service up here, but it's all your projects down below. So that's the top part. And so I'm going to go over the projects. I think that's going to be important to see what this is based on. And the reason I'm showing this, why I started with this spreadsheet, is I took the spreadsheet basically that I presented to you last month and listened to the projects that I heard you say you wanted to see front loaded. So I'll go over those and where we've placed them here. But I thought that was important to do because what this shows, and this one is based on not only issuing in FY22 the remainder of the general obligation bonds, but this has the Project 1, which instead of saying space modernization, I'll say like the one commissioner, which he's right, it's the Judicial Center and the renovation of the existing courthouse. We're showing it, and you're going to see some dollars right here. The reason being, the general obligation bonds, even if we issued 127 million and used them all for projects 1, 2, and 3, based on the estimates of those projects, the project cost, there's roughly between 20 and $25 million that still has to be made up from just straight SPLOST revenue to fund those 3. So even when you're seeing that money here in the second quarter, it doesn't mean that that's when we're starting the space modernization project. Since there's going to be a siting and a lot of approval processes, design, planning, those could start whenever we say they start in here. This is in essence showing that the construction would start somewhere probably between tier 3 and tier 4 and as you mentioned, and that's what we've shown here, is spreading that out. Now there could be a gap in here if we decided to wait a year to do or 2 years, whatever, to do the renovation to the courthouse. What I'm showing here is for these monies, they would join in and do the construction of the Judicial Center and then spread out and then do the renovation of the courthouse over a roughly 3 to 4 year period. So in addition to this top part, the projects themselves are listed almost numerically, but we grouped them into like projects. They're down the side. The approved budget for each project is down this column. And then the cost for each of the projects, most of the cases you'll see that they're spread out because, again, most of the time, even if you don't have siting, you've still got planning, you've got approvals. You typically go in front of mayor and commission for at 2 spots, that concept and the schematics. And then you start your design and your construction. So typically, depending on the size of the project, they're going to be spaced out over anywhere from 2 to 4 to 5 years. So that's why, even though you've got one project here, Patty's working this, so we'll work in unison here. But a project anyway would typically take a few years. So what I wanted to start here, and I'm going to start in this area and work my way down. And what I'd like to see is if we can agree and then mainly talk about the projects 13 through 35. So to just get you oriented, projects 1, 2, 3, and 4, that's your big 3, plus the debt service is project 4. Then you have your annually funded projects, and those are fire department, public safety vehicle and equipment, park facility improvements and facilities and equipment. And those are, for the most case, where general fund money was either cut out completely or cut out partially with that funding mechanism shifted to SPLOST 2020.
Hey, Robert, can I ask you a question about that real quick?
Yes.
So with for example, number 20, the park facilities improvements, you've got in all the scenarios, looks like you've got 300,000 each year starting in 2022, but in the 2011 SPLOST, there's still $1.7 million left over to spend from the 2011 SPLOST based on the December 4th update. So I guess what I'm saying is, that's kind of a lot of money. And I really want to say also that the public facilities park improvements, when we developed this SPLOST list, we kind of, when we were doing it, we were looking at certainly some of the leisure services related projects, the expenses for some of those were more than we allocated in the SPLOST. So I think with that park facilities improvement program, what we did was we put money into that in case some of those leisure services related projects that we cut back on needed some additional funds as they were being built or developed. So at any rate, that's, from what I remember, that was some of the intent of those dollars going to $6 million.
And that's
the concern is that there's still 1.7 million left in 2011 SPLOST dollars that hasn't been utilized yet.
And that's a good comment. And Ken and Andrew are both on here. I'm going to start with, and you're right. This Ken and I have had a lot of discussions on these, and they've actually, although there's 300,000 in these first years, you'll see that it's actually backloaded somewhat for the reason you're talking about, knowing that there was some money left and they wouldn't need as much. But this is not broken down annually in even increments. I backloaded that with just put in here what Ken and Andrew felt like they would need to supplement those other dollars. But they're on here, and I'm going to let them comment to that as well. It's a good question. Thank you.
Well, let me respond by saying a good bit of that 1.7 million is committed in projects that are currently going on at Santa Creek Park, renovating that beach and the surrounding area there, and also hopefully of being able to address one of the playgrounds that's 30 years old now. So those projects are underway. They were slowed down, unfortunately, because of the pandemic. But most of that money is committed to current projects.
Yeah, most of that money is money we just moved into that project in June to replace the FY21 budget money that was cut for roofs for Lay Park and Bishop, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
There's 2 roofs, which are almost 600 of that.
Correct. Bishop is the big one, which has had several leaks in the past couple of years.
So I'll build on that a little bit. In FY20 and FY21, the commission took action on a budget that reduced both fleet and facility capital funding contributions to zero or close to it. I'm sorry, that is not correct. Facilities, yes. Fleet, they initially removed public safety funding to the tune of about $1.2 million. Last fiscal year, that was removed, plus some other general fund contributions. So we have begun to accrue very significant capital deficits on our existing infrastructure. Now, that was offset last year, as Keith just mentioned, with some contributions out of that SPLOST 11 balance. My team is currently working on implementing those projects at facilities. We have already installed a generator at Fire Station 1 as a replacement, and we have some roof projects underway at the library and the parks. We are certainly better off for that money, absolutely. But one challenge we have is that because it's SPLOST money from 11, it must be correlated to SPLOST 11 projects. There was no generic bucket of facilities funding. So one example of where we run into a challenge with that is we have a roof that is now due at the health department over on Hancock. It is a very expensive expenditure, and I do not believe that I could tie it to a SPLOST 11 project. So we're now having to look to SPLOST 20 or the general capital budget.
Well, Andrew, I'm sorry. I was just talking about specifically the park improvements because both 2011 and 2020 have a title of park facilities improvements.
And I can speak to that a little bit too, Commissioner Hamby and Andrew and Kent. And that bucket was not meant so much to augment the other parks projects that are found on this list, but there's but these annually funded projects, the fire department equipment, the public safety vehicles, facility equipment systems, park facility improvements, that was where the mayor and commission, we talked about trying to use SPLOST funds for some of the general capital needs to free those up for other things. So these are routine replacements of various things across the parks. And from a general capital standpoint, leisure services spends down their dollars every year because of the need across the parks to keep them up.
And I might add that our initial request in this project was $25 million based on our spreadsheet and inventory and capital assets and the conditions of all of that equipment and locations. So this is a small portion of what we initially needed in that full project.
One of the things notable to me in the named leisure services projects in 2020 is the number that really aren't there. Lay, East Athens, Ben Burton, Southeast Clarke, and so I know all those have ongoing capital costs associated with them.
Correct.
Thank y'all. That's why I wanted everybody on here. That's just very good information, very good dialogue. And again, I want to commend the directors, because I went back to them 2 or 3 times just to really challenge them to say, where do you have to have that money? When do you have to have it? And is there anything we can move out, even if it's just a little bit, to try to bring some other projects out? And they were really phenomenal in the give that they did. So let's so I'm going over these first ones to see if, I'm not saying that you can absolutely go in there and move stuff around and change it, but I'm really trying to get down so we can talk more on the projects. So that's why I want to go over these first ones. Again, 5, 8, 20, and 27, where your annually funded projects. 6, 7, and 9 are your public safety related projects, which is, of course, the Fire Station 5, E911 phone system, and then the mobile medical services facility. And so 2 of those aren't a lot of money. The bigger one is the fire station, and we've shown that in the middle, really, quarter 2 and 3. So we've stretched that out probably farther than the chief would like, but that's where we're showing it in this scenario. And then I mentioned this in the presentation, and that was to take a look at the sustainability related projects and see if you're okay with the way that the amounts of money that I pulled up from the ends and distributed more in the first years. And I'd been asked a question last time: do these monies go along with the new projects? And typically, what I heard from staff was that these are more for retrofits, not that they can't be put into projects that may have a lot of sustainability or renewable energy in them. That they could be a supplement, but a lot of this money is for retrofit. So I may have misspoken on that answer last time. I think it was Commissioner Link who asked me that question, and I've got people on here if you want to go into that deeper. But you'll see the money that I did pull up to put in there, which is significantly different from what I had last time. And I heard your comments and I agreed with them. I think Commissioner Thornton had commented about it as well.
Yeah, I have a quick, sorry, I'm trying to unmute myself. Yeah, as far as, okay, so you're saying that the renewable energy bucket of money is meant for existing facilities to retrofit them with renewable energy, whereas these brand new projects, renewable energy mechanisms are built into those projects. That's the theory. Now, Andrew might want to. We had some long discussions on that, and so I don't know that it's a hard and fast rule, but that was a lot of my understanding. Okay, that's reassuring because I was under the impression that yes, when we were designing these projects, they were designed to be modern facilities, which includes renewable energy. So as we move forward with our housing project and, space modernization and all that, and any new facilities we build, the new facilities will have renewable energy designed into the project on the front end.
Yes. In fact, sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, Robert. Well, I would say this, and especially as we're looking out over 12 years, it is absolutely clear that the mayor and commission are committed to renewable energy. And just because we're, we have the public here and we want to manage expectations. That is the intent, Commissioner Link, no question. As we get further along, if construction costs escalate greatly, we may have to look at that and how we manage that and what parts of the program we could, you could cut other pieces of the building before you cut renewable energy, but there's just so much of the unknowns in the future, but that is absolutely the intent.
Yep.
My concern is, as we move along and make improvements to spaces, we need new roofs on things and stuff. When you put a new roof on, that's kind of the time to incorporate solar. So my feeling is, we need to have this constant collection going towards renewable energy so we can dip into it along the way. Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, ma'am. Andrew, do you want to answer that?
I'm going to actually defer to Mike Wharton and jump in if he needs any additional information.
Commissioner Link, you're exactly right. We are looking at the opportunity to pick this low-hanging fruit to go back to these facilities and opportunities where we already know we're behind the curve for energy conservation, and begin to bring those up, because the newer buildings are going to LEED certification 20 years ago is if you had platinum 20 years ago, now that is common to the general construction business. So as we go back, we want to pick those buildings up. We want to pick those roofs up. We want to put these new facilities and opportunities out there so we begin to address our stock as we move forward and bring those forward at the same time. And
I have a question about.
So yeah, I just want to reiterate, the new projects were costed out with top renewable energy and efficiency. Is that what you're saying? Because I'm hearing from folks that served on that SPLOST committee that don't understand that was the case.
Did you say the top sustainability? Did you say top?
Or they were costed out with
Right.
the renewable energy incorporated into that cost.
Yeah, I would assume it's like Blaine said. It depends on what we're talking about when you say sustainability. So it's a great question, and I can't answer that one as far as the was it costed into.
On that,
hey Robert, can I chime in real quick? I just want to remind everybody that the renewable energy construction guidelines for government construction is currently in the Legislative Review Committee. So I think in January, maybe Andrew is going to be back on deck with proposals for how we're going to accommodate renewable construction within, moving forward from that point forward, and that'll incorporate all these SPLOST projects.
And that's where I probably can jump in. I sat through a lot of those SPLOST projects myself. I would say that upon initial submittal, many applicants did in fact submit for solar, but as is common to the process, they were asked if they could reduce their project. And so most projects submitted reductions. It is plausible that those reductions no longer have funding to sustain solar. The current county policy is for a LEED certified building at new construction. And so that is what is basically guaranteed in a SPLOST project. Solar would be in the mix and could either be funded by the project itself if its funding is sufficient, or through Project 11.
Callie, can I ask a question? Callie?
Yeah.
So I think Melissa's question is a really important question because, and we kind of need, if we're going to try and figure out tierings, we kind of need to know the answer to the question, which is new construction, does it or does it not anticipate the energy saving attributes? Because if the answer to that question is the cost, the budget for the new construction already includes that, those assumptions that we're going to do the energy saving solar and all the rest of it,
then where we tier the energy mitigation and the renewable energy project needs to mirror our renovations, not our new construction, which is going to shape how we tier these things. If the budgets for the new construction do not include those things, then the renewable energy needs to mirror both the new construction and the renovation timetables. And so we really need an answer to Melissa's question, I think.
Thank you, Andy. That's what I was trying to say.
I might be able to add a little bit to that. We're estimating that we could easily spend between $425,000 and $975,000 a year outside of new construction. But of that, the higher number, probably the 975, could incorporate solar on new construction if it had been cut, with the exception of the Classic Center and the North Athens projects. They can also be added fairly easily after a project, provided the roof structure is designed and some of the infrastructure is put in place at the time of construction. So we're looking at literally $500,000 that we could spend just on renovation projects, on energy-related savings associated with renovation projects.
Well, and I understand that, Mike, and I appreciate your clarification, but I don't know about any of the other commissioners, but I don't know which projects had the renewable energy and the solar and everything cut from them and which do not. So we kind of need to know that if we're going to put a tiering together that ensures that we have enough money in the renewable energy project to make sure that any construction we do, whether it's new construction or renovation, is able to meet the standards that we want it to do. And so, to reiterate, if what we're planning on new construction already has that in the budget, then the renewable energy project just needs to mirror or be in sync with the renovations. But if those new construction projects do not have that in the budget, then that sets up a completely different tiering schedule. And I don't know about anybody else, but I don't, off the top of my head, know which of the new construction projects do and do not have sufficient money already in the budget to do things like solar, etc.
Well, I will say that I think all the projects, or I can't say that, many of the projects, when I looked at the applications, in the narrative of the submission, the intent was that we're going to do renewable energy. As you'll remember, and this happens in each of the SPLOST, there's not enough money to suit all the needs, and so there was an alternate proposed. To your point, Commissioner Harrod, we can go back and see, in some cases, the alternate proposed was by the entity that submitted it. In some cases, the budgets were cut. And in all cases, I don't think that there was a separate bucket for renewable energy that was either taken in or taken out. It was just taken from the entire project. A case in point would be facility space modernization. I think that received $10 million less than it initially was proposed. So all that to say, beyond that, even if we sat here and told you exactly which ones did or didn't, there's other vagaries in the future that we can't, determine, and that cost escalation, things of that nature. So having said that, I think it would be prudent to take some or all of those funds and have those match up with some of the bigger building projects, and if they are not used or not needed as a renewable energy contingency, if you will, then they could go ahead and be spent on retrofits there. The problem is that some of those building projects, I think at the end of this exercise, are going to be a little bit further out in the future. So you may have to wait on the use of those funds. That might be one way to mitigate this confusion.
Can I jump in? Sorry, I think I'm on a bit of a lag, so I keep trying to jump in when somebody's already talking. I apologize for that. So the way I'm hearing this is it sounds like nobody really knows exactly how much we're going to need for solar in these projects. But if we know that a number of projects have had their budgets reduced and we want to incorporate solar, and hopefully we'll even have a policy that's going to mandate it, then it sounds to me like we can put more money into solar sooner, use that to pay for the solar portions of those projects, and then that frees up money for those projects to be better facilities. So if we want the East Side Library to be fully solar, which I think we all do, and we're going to have a policy that mandates that, well, even if that's going to be built into their budget, they're probably going to have to cut out other things to reach it if we don't have buckets to pull from elsewhere. So in my mind, it makes sense to have this money available sooner, especially hearing Mr. Wharton say that they could use $500,000 a year just to update facilities now. And I guess I'd like to remind everybody too that this is something we get a return on our investment on. We save money in the general fund by having, better sustainability in our infrastructure. So in my mind, one of the best things we can spend money on right away is solar. And I'd love to see, some of those 7-digit numbers moved into Q1 personally.
Okay. That's why we're having this discussion. That's why I asked that question, specifically, because I wanted to hear from y'all.
So it sounds like there's certainly interest. Well, I think we can say from the very high level, interest in all projects being as renewable as possible and as efficient as possible. And so given that dynamic, interest in almost as an insurance policy, having more of those renewability dollars earlier in the program, even if that means we bank them until they sync up with either a renovation or new construction, if it comes to pass that some of those dollars are needed for the new construction project. And I think it's understandable that, until we get into pre-engineering for many of these, there's just not going to be certainty about that.
Thank you, Mayor. Well said. And a couple of points to that. One is we can always come back and adjust the tier funding schedule as we get into it, start seeing where things are going. There's going to be some natural attenuation that's going to occur in this that would allow us to come here and get back in front of y'all if we need to change something and move it around. And then the other point was, I can assure you, I've sat in on a committee yesterday, as Andrew did as well, sat in on a committee, and some of the questions challenging to the architects in this case were sustainability questions. Those are in the conversations. Everyone that I've heard, those are some of the first questions.
All right. Want to move on to the next cluster?
Yep. All right, Patty. So I'm kind of separated those top, and I heard you in there that we need to go back and pull some money up front, and you're gonna see as we do that, because we'll go through the exercise on this one, and then I'll explain to you what spreadsheets 2 and 3 are. Let me go on through the rest of the projects. Leisure services, you can see Holland Park, and again, these were done with conversations from the directors for the most part. So Holland Youth Sports, we spread that one out. That's a project that can be done, or projects that can be done individually. So we broke those into yearly to try to spread those out through the years, with the first one starting in Tier 6, which is FY26. Athens West Park, that's primarily a property purchase. So we tried to put some funds, not too far up front, but that's one of those that if property became available, especially one, a sizable piece that you would need as a minimum, that we put we went ahead and put a little bit of due diligence money in FY25, with the rest of the funds coming later, since don't really know, there's not an identified piece of property yet for that particular, for project 14. Sandy Creek Nature Center, that's not a big project. We put it in the middle. Certainly wish it could be further up, and it's not a lot of money. And that's something that might move up later if we get some savings. Memorial Park, that's an important one. Kent has reiterated to me several times of the need for that because of liability type issues. And that one can be spread out over a couple of years, but that's drainage and some spillway and issues with the dam to be looking at. So we've kept that in the front. And again, this particular spreadsheet is hearing from y'all, other than obviously I didn't do a good job on the renewable energy, but the rest of these are pulled up toward the front that we heard from the last discussions that we had. So Beach Haven Park, obviously we've had a lot of conversation on that. I originally had it further out. Recent conversations and emails, what we did is pulled $300,000 into FY22, which would be for a master plan and some site planning, with a skip of a year, and then an additional $700,000 for access, more a formal access purchase of property for that, and then maybe some minimal trails. And when I get to the end of this one, Mike or Kent might want to go more in depth, and then put more of the park for further out in Q3, which would be just because of the type of park that it is and the conservation easements that are associated with it and the protection of the historical and the ecosystems that I don't know, is this appropriate time, Blaine, to discuss more on that one?
I think so. It's gotten a lot of attention and comment from you, Mayor and Commissioner. You've heard from constituents, and we have looked very hard at how to provide access in a way that balances the needs of the land before a master plan is done. I think we can all agree with if you read the Beach Haven SPLOST proposal that there's simply not enough money to do all those things, a bridge across the river, restoring the house, the trails, that type of thing. So like most things, there's a limited amount of funds and a whole bunch of priorities that really we can only get through with a very robust and open master planning process. Now, the question, you've not disagreed with that. I haven't heard any disagreement about that, but can we provide immediate access? And I think that this brings up a very good point on many of these projects. What you don't see on this screen in front of you are the operational costs that are associated with the projects, whether putting them, creating a new building that needs new attention going forward, or delaying projects, delaying building a building that if there are tenants in a current building, then you have to continue to keep that one up. So there are operational costs, and this is a great place to bring that up. Staff has looked at this. We do think some pedestrian public access at Beach Haven is possible, but there will need to be some operational dollars associated with maintaining the property as well as the staff associated with that to do that. So that access issue isn't necessarily on the table tonight, but I think that was one of the suggestions made of moving funds up to provide that access. We think we can provide some limited access to Beach Haven immediately. It would not necessarily take SPLOST dollars so much as it would take operational dollars. And Kent or Mike, would you care to add anything to that?
Well, yes, I will, Blaine. Thank you very much. We're looking at needing some staff. We actually need staff out there now based on the use of that property. Currently, if we're going to be protecting the cultural, environmental, and historical resources that are on that property, Mike can speak to setting up those cameras, but the cameras have witnessed, activity that is less than desirable going on out there that we need to be monitoring if we want our investment. So if we are actually going to continue to authorize people access to that site, then we only anticipate numbers to grow, the number of visitors, because they have been, especially since tours were opened up in support of the SPLOST project. It exposed the property to a lot of people that were seeing it for the first time. And it's a great problem to have, but it's created issues nonetheless that staff has to be able to manage and monitor, that we just currently do not have the resources in all of our trails and open spaces division of our department because of the 45 plus miles of trails that they're trying to monitor and all the open acreage that they're trying to deal with. So to be able to have a position out there, both one part-time, one full-time, a vehicle to get them there, a little bit of equipment to maintain that property is pretty critical. And I'll let Mike speak to sustainability's needs.
From an operational standpoint, it makes it a little bit more complex when you're trying to do some of our restoration activities around having people on site, as opposed to not having people on site. And in putting the cameras up, we were really looking at how do we protect those historic resources, because we had some vandalism, and some of our ecological resources, we'd had some vandalism and looking at it. But what it really showed us is how people were interacting with the property, which highlighted the need for operation. Most truthfully, most people were using it well. And some of the, and I understand, we understand exactly why they want to get there. It's a beautiful spot. A lot of the damage was being done because people didn't understand how they were interacting with it was creating the damage. And having staff on site to help educate is critical to protection and to help guide people in what things work well and what things really could result in a degradation of the site. And that's really, to Kent's point and needs, that's really where that need comes in. My needs are mainly around just having to have extra staff available, so I make sure when we're doing our restoration activities, it's done safely with public present, as opposed to right now, public's not there.
Thanks, Mike. Other questions?
Well, you might imagine I have a question here since it's in my district. This is Jesse. Sorry, I'm keeping my video off because it's really glitching out on me. I apologize, y'all. I really appreciate y'all's comments and clarifications here. Did I understand correctly that independent of the master planning process, if there's operational money to meet those staff needs, that we could open up Beach Haven to minimal kind of trail use even sooner than completing the master plan?
Well, staff, and Kent and Mike, and we've all discussed, foot access only for walking and exploring the site was something that we think we could accommodate through some operational spend. And we would just say that, again, we think a master planning effort is going to be very important to help dictate the spending of the rest of those precious dollars.
Okay, yeah. I mean, if that's possible, I think that meets the vast majority of the desires of the folks that we've been hearing from. And, I know that everybody on this body kind of received a whole flood of emails all at once there. That was honestly a fraction of what I've been getting from folks in the district. Really how this ended up on my radar was from people just continually reaching out to me over this past year. And I think those cameras, while we're seeing use right now, including use that might be concerning, I would just like to share that I don't think we're seeing an accurate depiction of what the use probably was before the cameras went up, because now people who are more likely to abide by the signage and the cameras are less likely to be there. And I think there was quite a bit of use of the space that was, as Mr. Wharton pointed out, like perfectly appropriate. And if we had a way of opening it up to more use, with some staff support, but just the public being there, especially with the number of folks who have offered volunteer support. I believe there's even an organization that would love to sign a memorandum of understanding to formalize supporting some of that. I think some of those dangers that we're worried about to the property would be mitigated just by the presence of people being around.
Well, and I will say too, thank you, Commissioner Hull. I think those are well noted, and Leisure Services Director Kent Kilpatrick said tonight that there are lots of other properties, and I will say that the Mayor and Commission in the last decade, we've really added a lot of green space and trails and facilities. So I think that's and that's been possible because of a SPLOST, quite frankly. And with that, and a lot of folks don't think about it, comes the operational. Got to take care of it, and you've got to maintain it. And I will say that I was having this conversation with the commissioner this week. Adding positions is one way to really make your costs go up, because you have to sustain that over time. And I can say as a manager, and certainly Kent can attest to this, we have tried to get by with as little staff as possible to manage these things. And I think we're just getting to a point to where, if we continue to add, we're going to have to, have the staff to support that. And that's really, so to say all that, Commissioner Hull, this is a solution, but it, going into the FY22 budget formulation, that's going to compete with a lot of other priorities that are out there too.
I might also add, if I could, that we're beginning to see similar activity at the Tallahassee property. Soon we're going to be, we have already begun hearing from neighbors, and that's going to continue to grow. My hope is that by adding a position here at Beach Haven to address this property, perhaps it can also help us address other things on the west side. Burton Park is getting ready to add a restroom and a picnic shelter, which is going to bring additional people to that site. Tallahassee is starting to see similar activities. So this position can serve a much greater purpose, perhaps, than just Beach Haven, but it is definitely needed at that Beach Haven property.
All right.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks, Kent, Mike, Blaine, and good questions, Commissioner Houle. Move on down to Tallahassee Forest Nature Preserve. We've got that out in Q3.
Construct a MRF, so we did want it pushed back slightly, but any new contractor is going to have expectations to have equipment that meet 2021 specs, not 1995 specs. Thank you.
Thanks, Suki. Well said. Any questions?
Suki, thank you for that update. How much money are we losing through the general dollars in keeping this facility, keeping the maintenance up currently? And how much do you project as new modern technology comes out and recycling methods change? How much do you think we're losing?
I'd probably need a little more time, Commissioner Davenport, to calculate that, but I can tell you capital, this coming year, we're going to be doubling what we asked for in capital if we have to remain in this facility for 10 years, which we're trying to plan 10 years just in case, we're pushed back in the SPLOST cycle. We're trying to look at keeping duct tape and paper clips on hand to keep us running. No, I'm kidding, not duct tape and paper clips, but we don't want to. Like I said, we've had to double you'll see that we'll have to double our capital request for some of the improvements to the MRF if we are planning to be in this facility for 10 years. The facility is small also, Commissioner Davenport, which makes it very challenging. It's the smallest single stream facility in the United States. We've got lots of height, but not lots of length or width, which makes it very challenging for new processing equipment. But if you'll allow me, I can run some numbers and get you a more accurate picture of what we would lose year over year by keeping the same facility for 10 or more years.
Thanks, Suki. Anybody else? Okay, thanks, Suki. Well said. The next one is the mental health recovery facility that we've got shown in Q3. The Welcome Center in this scenario, and again, this is a scenario for talking points. The Welcome Center, because of some work that had already been done there, some discussions with staff, we moved that into the Q4. Transportation, public works, infrastructure related projects, airport capital. I went back to Mike after the last work session, asked if we could either spread something out or shift any, which he did. He came back and we shifted between 23 and 24, I believe it was. We moved out over $1 million. I think that was the case. But what you'll find on these, most of these are matches to some type, whether it's an FAA or a GDOT grant, which are great grants. Typically, they're 90%, somebody else, 10% our match, or maybe 90/5/5 in some cases. So, Mike, do you want to add anything to these?
Sure. Thank you, Robert. Mm-hmm. As Robert mentioned, we did move several projects from 22 and 23. And so really all that's left is just critical projects in those two fiscal years. And they all relate to safety. These are items that the FAA has come to us. We get inspected once a year, and these are items that the FAA has come to us and say, you need to get this done. You need to get this done. Well, they only say it so many years, before they really start taking action, on you. So we're kind of at that critical point on the projects for fiscal year 22 and 23 that we really need to get them done. And they need to be done because it's a safety issue with the airplanes, the corporate that we have, especially Delta and the other charters that we have. They're heavy enough airplanes that the asphalt that we want to repair needs to be replaced. and along with the signage and the lights too. We don't get any money from the Athens-Clarke County General Fund, and we're self-sufficient, which I'm proud to say. So the matching fund is very important, for us to get these projects done. And as Robert said, it's good money. In 22 and 23, it's like 1.6 million. We'll get roughly about 11 million from the FAA and the state just for those. And if it's a federal project, we'll get 95% funding, and if it's a state project, it's usually 75%. So I tried to move what we could, but these 2 years are pretty critical to get these projects done. We also in 21 we're going to start in March partial project on Taxiway Alpha, and so what 22 is basically to finish that project. We weren't able to get all the funding for that, so we were able to start the project and get that pavement up to where it should be, and then also so 22 we'll be able to finish it out, and then we'll be good to go there. Yeah, so those are critical.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions of Mike?
Yeah, I have a question. Could you elaborate a bit for us, Mr. Matthews, on just what would happen if this got pushed back? Because coming into this meeting, if I'm being perfectly honest, I was looking at this project in number 28, the mental health recovery facility, and personally would love to advocate for kind of swapping the timelines of those two. So I'm just curious to hear the the details there.
I'd be glad to tell you. The FAA, like I say, they pretty much run the show. So if they think it's unsafe, they will shut you down. They did this in Macon, and I don't know if Judd was there at the time, but Macon went through this where they were unsafe, and the FAA came in and shut them down. They had to halt all 139 operations. Now, the pavement we have here, it's pretty old. It's probably going on 30 years, I would think. That in some areas of this pavement too, if it rains and we have a delta come in, you can see even the pavement moving, where it forces water up, from the pavement. So we actually, that portion of it, we spent a little money and concreted that, but it really is at the critical point where it's a safety issue. And the FAA, like I say, they've come. I've been here about 2.5 years, and both years they say, you need to get this done, and they're only going to say it so many times before that happens.
And could you just clarify how much of that 5.1 million is required for this critical upgrade or this critical repair?
Really, it's the 1.6 fiscal year 22 and 23 is where I put those projects because they were so critical. I needed to get those done as soon as possible. Everything after that is not as critical and can be moved even, through the years. We would like to build a transient hangar, but that's nothing critical. I mean, there's much more critical things than a transient hangar on this list. So we can keep moving that as well. And the only other thing that I would say out of that 5, not in the 22 or 23, but somewhere, we would have to do a new parking lot because we really do not have a whole lot of parking here. And then also Taxiway Bravo, which is to the second runway, that will have to be done eventually, but it's not as critical right now. So that can probably wait. I mean, the FAA really hasn't been honest about that one, so I'm really not worried about that right now.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying those. If I may, just for a minute, Mr. Mayor. I guess I'd like to encourage my colleagues to think about the mental health recovery facility. I know we kind of moved past that one pretty quickly. There's nobody from Advantage Behavioral on the call, unfortunately, but a lot of these things that we're talking about incur operational costs for us to upkeep as well. One of the really amazing things about that project is once we build it, they handle the running of the facility, and it has not only an immense cost savings for the human impact that I think we can all imagine of people having somewhere other than jail or prison to go, but also would save us money with the cost of putting people in jail, which is run by the county, instead of through this facility. So I really feel like that project's a big win, and I'd love to see us find a way to fund that sooner in the schedule. And it sounds like maybe some of that money could come from these less urgent airport improvements. So I'm just throwing that out there.
Yeah. And Kelly, I'd like to follow up on Jesse if I could real quick. I don't disagree with you at all, Jesse, on that. I certainly see the mental health recovery facility project as a human expenditure that ought to be towards the front. And I would suggest perhaps taking a look at shifting that, the one above it, the recovery of material processing and reuse a bit back in order to get that, and also maybe doing some from the airport that's allowable. That's non-safety issue related at this point in time. Just my 2 cents worth.
Thanks, Mike.
To add. Yeah.
Okay. I noted both of those. Thank you, commissioners. Thank you, Mike. Okay. Vincent Drive sidewalk project. In this scenario, have it in quarter 3 and 4. Tallahassee.
Yeah, on that one.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, on the Vincent Drive one, I mean that's one that I kind of brought up at the last time we discussed this.
Yes, sir.
About wanting to see that one prioritized when we're again backing up to what Commissioner Houle brought up, just having this kind of human-facing, more equitable projects need to be prioritized. I'm concerned that what I'd argue is one of the most dangerous routes in our community that is so heavily populated with transit service and a park there that has 0 sidewalks and 0 shoulder to even walk on. And yet many low-income and working-class families living there having to utilize those resources. I really find it just kind of unacceptable for us to be pushing out a project like that was one of the most favored and quickly passed by the SPLOST committee, and pushing it out a decade, especially when it's kind of one of the smaller projects. And if we could possibly get some savings from some of the less prioritized, less urgent airport capital improvements. And honestly, I would even say I am a huge fan of the Water Trails project. Want to see that move forward too. I still think those basic an ability for a person to walk safely to and from the bus or the park or their home is kind of needs to be higher prioritized.
Okay. Anybody?
And this is Mike. I would agree with that. We, similar over to Mitchell Bridge and Timothy Road. So if you can find a way to do it for Vincent Drive, that would be good as well. But again, go back to, any of these that are human activity cost, I think will help. I mean, moving the recovered material processing center back a little bit. I know Suki don't like me to, it's probably wanting to jump through the computer at me. But those two seem to be a little bit higher human priorities than that. So,
can I jump in real quick, Mr. Mayor? So I hear what Commissioner Hamby is saying about the cover materials, but at the same time, it's costing taxpayer money for upkeep, and it needs to be modern. And the less stuff we can send into the landfill or gets thrown away, it's not recyclable. Actually goes to our landfill, and it saves us money. So I agree with the human capital as well, but at the same time, we got to think about the taxpayers as well.
And I would agree with that.
I'm curious as to why the water trail is so much on the front end. Is there some reasoning behind that? Where it seems like so many of these other projects have been pushed to the back end, but why is the water trails in that first tier?
Kent can respond to that. Some of that was matching some grants that they've already got coming in, but Kent.
That's right. That largest amount is a grant match. So we have gotten word that we're a strong candidate for that grant funding. So this allows that match so that we could continue the first phase. Logic thinking of those years that follow it is that while we're in that mode of building and there's small ticket items, that we could continue to finish out that project. Now, those other small ticket items could potentially be pushed back because they're not tied to the grant. Just the initial on the middle of Coney down at Macon Highway is where the main takeout point will be that's grant funded.
Okay, thank you.
And back to Vincent Drive. We've got some from Transportation and Public Works on here, either Steve or Stephen. Do y'all want to say anything?
I can jump in and just to throw some more thoughts at you. Of course, over here at Public Works, we'd love to build that out. But things to remember, you all just approved the multi-use path over on Jefferson River Road, which would tie directly to this project. So there's of course potential that if we could time it out right, we might be able to bundle that and save some money. But also a reminder that that multi-use path would be bike and ped, whereas this is right now just pedestrian. So if you wanted to look at that project and talk about potential for turning it into a bike ped project as well, we have to think about available funding. There's not really bike funding available now. There may be at the next SPLOST. And then one more final timing consideration is staff capacity. So we have pushed a lot of bike ped projects through in these last few months, and we continue to do so. I would just caution that we want to make sure staff has the capacity to inspect and oversee the contracted construction for these. So we would need to think hard about, if we did move this up, what tier that would move to.
And thank you for that, Stephen. And I agree. I mean, obviously, if we could do some coupling with those things for some cost savings, obviously that would be fantastic. But if not, I mean, I haven't arguing necessarily that we have this FY21, FY22. I just feel like pushing this back when it's such an integral need for that community all the way to, heck, when I'm going to be 50 years old, it's just not acceptable. And also, like, not only that, right, but like the kids growing up in the area right now whose families voted for this SPLOST project, seeing that on the ballot, those kids would be in college or moved away before it's ever even built. So,
hey, most of your parks will probably still work when you're 50.
Well, if I could offer too, and this is what makes this such a hard exercise for everybody, is that unfortunately, and we can speak more to the borrowing and the timing of that here shortly. I think Robert's got that planned. But we're going to have to move some things further back. And let's just say that of all the projects, I think there was $1.2 billion in projects that were presented, and some very worthy projects didn't make the list. So every single one of these are needed projects. It's just that in trying to balance the revenue coming in with the expenses going out and not, go overboard on interest expense and preserve more for projects, as part of this exercise, there's some projects that are going to have to be moved into the out years, unfortunately. And that's what we're looking for you to help us determine. We hear you. There's things that need to be moved up and done tomorrow. But to offset that, some other projects are going to have to be moved back.
Mayor, can I add to something here?
And I'd like to say something as well.
And I will say, when you turn 50, things start to break. So Tim is right on that. So look at Andy. Look, he looks horrible there on the screen. But I guess I will say this about having to move some of these projects forward. I keep going back to 2011. We've got, according to the report, almost $1 million there in interest for 2011. And one of the categories for 2011 is fire equipment and safety. And we also have that in this 2020 project. So in the first three tiers, first quarter of this, we're spending almost $1 million in fire safety. And I'm just wondering why we couldn't transfer, or why we couldn't use those 2011 dollars for that fire safety that we need here. So that frees up that $1 million. If you see where I'm going with all that. But also,
I will note,
at the beginning of
just to mention the $2011 really briefly, having had to look at those both in the context of alleviating some general fund operating capital, as well as trying to think how we may need to flex for lots of other projects that are going to come in over bid. The Firefly Bridge being a really good recent example. There will be lots of pretty dramatic needs that will draw those dollars, potentially even including some of the live pipe stream replacement.
Oh, and I don't disagree with that, but I was just looking at the unallocated interest. That doesn't account for monies that are going to be left over from some of the projects there in 2011. But I will say this too: at the beginning of another option is at the beginning of the conversation. All the way over in FY 32 Tier 12, we're anticipating a projection of $6 million that's not going to go towards interest. I mean, I don't know if it will or not. So maybe we take the risk and say that it's not, and use that and spread it out to see if we can get some of these tiers early on and go from there. I mean, Robert said early on, this is sort of a changing, it could be a changing document. So if we're trying to address some of these human elements early on, that may be a way to do it.
If I can address
Thanks.
the $6 million in Project 4, that money is not available to be used until Tier 12. That's why it's sitting in Tier 12. So while that may be a cost saving to us, if it's not used for interest, you couldn't allocate that to another project until Tier 12. Does that make sense?
Not really, but I'll accept your explanation, I suppose.
Yeah, all these monies that are sitting here is how we anticipate spending them. So whatever tier it is sitting in, then that's when we expect to be using them. So this $6 million is expected to not be spent until Tier 12.
No, I get that, but if you're telling me, that $6 million is going to be extra money throughout the life of this SPLOST, then if you're projecting $6 million left over at the end of the day, then let's project $2 million left over at the end of the day.
Well, the bonding is a moving target as far as all the expenses until it's a done deal, and Tom Woodward can educate us on that a little bit more. But this right here is just an estimate.
Okay, thank you.
And David, something as well.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, what's kind of going through my mind, as we're trying to figure out, I mean, we have, a lot of, I mean, these are all good projects, but obviously, we've got to figure out a priority. And I mean, to me, it seems that there are 4 maybe guiding principles that we might think about as we move through here in terms of trying to tier things. So I think one is think about projects that will make us money and front end them rather than back end them. The second is projects that will save us money, and they should have a higher priority than those that are going to cost us money. And so that would be things like, the renewable energy, for instance. I think projects that revolve around the intellectual development of our young people, so things like the library, which we all seem to agree needs to be, front loaded, and the youth development center, because those will have long-term payoff for our community. But if you don't do them when people are young, you never get to catch up on that. And then I think the fourth guiding principle is that I think we should be looking at renovating facilities before we think about building new ones. So to me, as I'm looking through them, those are kinds of the 4 things that would shape how if I were doing this on my own, how I would be thinking about the tiering. And so some of the things that are kind of purely, nice to have, kind of recreational type things, I think to me are much less important to have up front than some of the things that either make us money, save us money, are involved in the long-term development of our youth, and that are, renovations rather than new construction. So I don't know if that helps anybody, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it.
Thanks, Andy. And Robert, I think you've just got kind of a handful of additional projects on the list. Let's go ahead and walk through those.
Okay.
And then maybe we can kind of do stop and sort of summarize what we've heard.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor. And we're having more dialogue than we will on spreadsheets 2 and 3, but I thought it was important to see where we were on some of these and why we had them where they were, but also needed feedback so this has all been good. Tallahassee Road, we had out as well. I say we, again, we were trying to balance some things, new versus old, for example. Jackson Street artwork in this scenario, that was one that had been mentioned as well. Did I skip something? No, so we had it. We actually have that one out. I know there was conversation of having it up, and it certainly makes some sense to be tied into the Bethel project. So that's there for discussion. Water trails we talked about, and live stream replacements is not a huge number. And so we put it in the second quarter to complement some other projects that I know that Transportation Public Works is working on. So at this point, you good, Mayor, if we do just a little bit of, I was going to let Patty move some things around and explain what the red that we're seeing at the top.
Sure.
Okay. So really this exercise, and in addition to showing you where we are, you can see that we're way out of balance here, to the tune of 24 to 25 million in tiers 6 and 7, which doesn't mean, and that's why I want to do this exercise. I think it's important to see the effect that moving something, and when you move it, you typically have to move it past the red. So if you see tiers 1, 2, 3, FY 21, 22, 23, you're thinking, well, there's 19, 18, we're underspending there. We're not. What you're going to see is if you took a project in the red and moved it up to the black in quarter 1, there's a cascading effect all the way through the tiers, which is going to make you worse. What you have to do is figure out if you want this to balance without borrowing, and that's a discussion. That's why David and Tom are on here, and others from finance. If we borrowing is, of course, we look at interest and it comes off the top, and it means less projects at the end, or at least the scopes of them. So I wanted to take a couple here just so you can see the impact when Patty moves them. So let's grab one that's got some size to it, Patty, like the broadband. I'm not advocating to move it out, but I just want you to see the red at the top and see what that does. So there's one that's in the black. It's in the first quarter. It's front ended. She moves it to the back. So you can see with that one, we took one of $6 million, and we're able to drop obviously from 25 million to 20 million. I mean, to less than 20. So 19. So that makes sense. But that took her moving it literally from the first 3 years to the back 3 years to do that. So show what happens if you move that just to the yellow. We move it just from quarter 1 to quarter 2, Patty. So there, again, we moved it an entire 3 years, but you had no effect on anything below. On quarter 3 and quarter 4, you're still at the 25 million. So even when you take something and move it 3 years, it has no effect on a good portion of the spreadsheet.
In order to balance this spreadsheet, you have to take items that are all the way back over here in the black, and you're going to have to move them past the red, which means that it's got to go all the way out here somewhere for us to start seeing some black numbers instead of red here. You can move this around. We, in fact, before turning this sheet in to you guys tonight, we moved some of these projects that we knew were going to be some of you were going to be very passionate about. We took those dollars and moved them like closer instead of Q4, Q3, or Q2 even. But the bottom line is we're still red because we don't have any money left over in those years to cover any of that. So the task is to find something here in the black or in the green columns that that you're going to feel comfortable with moving back here, unfortunately. Something else to think about too, one of the department directors said this in some of our meetings, I can't remember who, but it is important that that our citizens and constituents see some good projects going on here at the end of our program, because we're going to be vying and campaigning to try to start our next program. So we definitely want them to see some activity out here.
And David, did you want to add anything at this point before we move to the other spreadsheets? And in addition to the $6 million, that was a question in tier 12 that Patty had answered.
Well, I don't really have anything to add to the logic of what Patty said. I mean, you know, these projects have to be spaced out one way or the other, and they all can't be up front. So it really just becomes a question of ranking what's most important to the mayor and commission to be completed up front.
Okay.
So, Robert, do you want to discuss how the other two broad options vary from the first?
Yep. We're good. All right, Patty, let's go to number 2. Okay. Spreadsheet 2, again, is what we tried to do. And I already know things like the renewable that I would need to go back, move some things up, which of course makes things red. You've got to move something in its place, or you've got to, find another mechanism of funding. This one is closer. If you look at it, there's less red, more black. And the reason being, in this case, project 1, I'm not saying that I'm advocating to move it there, but project 1, the space modernization, facilities modernization, is moved out to Q4. That's where I'm showing construction for that and the renovation, but it would actually start closer to FY28 for the siding and the design, or the siding could be done earlier than the design. Obviously, that's a significant move, but that project is one of the big 3 that hasn't started, and it doesn't have the private funding associated with it like projects 2 and 3. So I simply put that out there to show you the impact that even moving that out to Q4, if we shift down, and I'm not going to talk as much about projects 1 through 4, 5 through 27. Oh, I didn't mean 5 through 27, but the public safety or the sustainability. I think we talked about those a good bit. Obviously, certainly we'll go back to them if you'd like to. But really, as you start in leisure services, even with moving project 1 out like we did, to get this down to even a $6 million red, and keeping in mind that this shows the same renewable energy that we had in spreadsheet 1. So you've asked me to move some of that up. So these reds will be more significant in Q2 and probably 3. So if you look at these, let's see which projects that we moved out to make this closer. Okay. Thanks, Patty. In this case, Holland was the same, Athens West, Sandy Creek, Memorial, Beach Haven's the same. In this one, let's see, Talisie's the same, Bishop Park's the same. This one, Bear Hollow is moved out. We had it further in 2 and 3. This has it in 3 and 4. Broadband's still up. So everything else. The mental health is moved up, I believe, in this one some. And Jackson is moved up in this one. So in this one, a lot of those projects that you talked about moving up are up. One or two were shifted back, but the biggest thing is that project one is moved out significantly in this one. So this is, I think maybe we go on to 3, and we showed these and the drastic difference in them.
Comment, Kelly?
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying, Robert, but I think it's important whilst we're looking at this table here, as Blaine or somebody mentioned earlier on, we've got to keep in the back of our mind also the operating costs. And my understanding was that, one of the things that our space modernization project would allow us to bring into government property some departments and activities that we're currently paying rent for where they're at. And so, Blaine, if you could maybe correct me if that's an incorrect statement, or agree if it's a correct statement, but moving a big capital cost late in SPLOST may help us on the SPLOST, but it may really muck about with our operating costs, which of course comes out of the general fund, on some of these other things. So I think it's important, as we're looking at this document, not to be fixated on this document solely, but also to keep in the back of our minds how this document intersects with our operating costs.
Absolutely. Well said. This is more to just show you what's happening. Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
Robert, I was going to add to that, Andy, and specifically with the space modernization program, that was designed to save some money. I'll point to example, if we ever get to a point of including a lot of these outlying departments into one building, like Satula, like the planning. I mean, the water department building alone is worth $3.2 million right now. You put that on the private market and sell it, that's $3.2 million that could go back into the government coffers, as can Satula and Daughtery Street. Robert, I'd be curious, if you're moving black numbers around, what would it look like if you did start the space modernization? And because I do, you mentioned the affordable housing needs to certainly stay in tier 1 like it is. And the Classic Center has some partners, but I would look at the facilities private funding, but I'd look at the facilities space modernizations also have a private funding if we can take these buildings like Daughtery, Satula, and turn them over to the private side. So I'd be curious to see what would happen if you started the facilities space modernization and the Classic Center, just because they need to get, both of those projects need to get their ducks in a row about where they're going and how it's going to look into FY23, and see what would happen to the red numbers there, or even FY24. I'd hate to start it then, but
okay. Yeah, Patty, you want to? Well, let's see.
I guess maybe use it on spreadsheet 3. Yeah, there you go. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's kind of what we have on spreadsheet 3.
Of moving, but you don't have it for the Classic Center.
Oh, yeah, that's right. And I'm not sure we can shift something around to.
The Classic Center is starting immediately, as well as affordable housing. Those monies are counted under the bond proceeds, right, and they're up here in the debt service area. We tried to simplify this sheet some, and all you see down here is just the additional SPLOST funding that would be needed. If you are doing the bonds to fund solely projects 1, 2, and 3, then those are accounted for up here under the bond debt service, with the exception of the additional monies that we would need for the affordable, for the space and modernization.
Right.
So Classic Center would be starting immediately, as well as, of course, affordable housing.
Have we determined that? I don't remember voting on that part.
Well, we have, I just know we have the memorandum of agreement with the Classic Center, and they have been moving forward with some of their items. I think there will be an agenda item maybe next month.
Yes.
Yeah, but I guess what I'm saying is we haven't approved any sort of construction contract or anything with it. And I'm just saying, there's still design and all that stuff to be done. So why could that not be, why could that not, all of this, what you have up here in that 10 million, 12 million, move it to FY23, move it, you see where I'm going?
I do, and it was covered a little bit as far as our limitations for our debt repayment. If we are doing the bonding for those projects 1, 2, and 3, then by pushing our debt repayment back 1 year, we're still locked into the FY30 repayment, and then we get probably too close or over our maximum principal for that repayment amount. I'm not sure if Tom can
get you there. But I guess if you can take that, I mean, if we're looking for other projects down below the 13 through 35, certainly if the Classic Center could get what they need to get in a row, I mean, they're not going to start construction next year.
I think right now, based on the sort of design and construction plan, they would finish construction third quarter of calendar 23.
That's correct.
Kelly, can I add something? Kelly?
Yeah.
May I add something?
Yeah.
Well, just kind of picking up on what Mike's saying. So, as I said a minute, we need to think about this in relation to our operating costs. But in terms of the space modernization project, if we bring all of those things into a central point, and then we can sell some of the maybe outlying property that we're using at the moment that we wouldn't have need for, that then becomes extra income that could be run against some of these red numbers, presumably. So, if we were to, and I'm just picking a number out of the air here, but if we were to do the space modernization project, bring some of the outlying areas into that building, and then sell that property, and let's just say for the sake of argument, collectively that brought in, I don't know, $7 million. That's $7 million that could be run against some of these red numbers. Is that not correct?
I mean, it makes sense to me.
I would have to defer to either David or Benjamin Brooks, maybe, as to legally. I guess we could do consider private funding, or I'm not sure. Do you know? Can you weigh in on that?
Well, I mean, I guess we would just add that money would, from the sale would technically go into the general fund, but there would be nothing wrong with us, with the commission collectively agreeing that whatever money is made from those sales goes towards, to supporting some of the interim shortfall, somewhere in the middle of this SPLOST project to make the numbers balance. And then you could pick it up on the back end.
Now that looking at a specific property example, so the Satula property is worth somewhere in the $3.5 million ballpark.
Yeah. Kelly, I see what Andy's saying too. It's almost like the general fund is loaning us the money until we get to the end. Is that what you're saying, Andy?
That's exactly what I'm saying. And so at the end of the day, by the end of the SPLOST, we've spent the amount of money that the SPLOST, is for, but we've kind of had a short-term temporary loan from the general fund that gets us through some of these, quarter 2 and quarter 3 issues until we get out of the red and back into the black. We still end up spending the same amount of money on the SPLOST, but it just maybe helps the cash flow a little bit.
But that revenue only comes if the space modernization is earlier rather than later.
Precisely.
Blaine, we're going to.
Well, no, I think that's a good plan. how tightly y'all want to script that with values for properties, into the future in the real estate market and whatnot. Y'all have always been clear that trying to consolidate in energy efficient buildings and space modernization and free up these outlying sites that we manage with older buildings and we spend money on for redevelopment. No question there. It's just how far do you want to go with speculating on values further down into the further out into the program.
Well, I mean, obviously, we don't know what the value of some of those properties is, 7 years from now or 5 years or whatever, but we kind of know what they are now, and we could at least plug those numbers in. But I mean, it's almost kind of like using the general fund as kind of like a bridge loan in the middle of SPLOST, because at the end of the day, we're going to spend, the $195 million or whatever it is on the SPLOST money. But the way it's set up at the moment, we've got a negative balance kind of in the middle. But if we do the space modernization early on, and we can get some of our other activities in that new space and sell that property, it might help us just with the cash flow. That's what I'm saying.
Right. And another thing to take account too, Andy and Mayor, is certainly we've seen this in previous SPLOST, the construction cost of things. I mean, I don't know what they'll look like in FY 30. So anyway,
that's true.
Robert, you want to contrast? Go right ahead.
I had a quick question about how, I guess, we move up the space modernization, but we're not really going to be able to execute it until the Judicial Center is completely constructed, right?
That's right.
I just wanted to bring that into people's minds.
That's correct. I mean, at the moment, those are both in that one bucket. But I mean, within that facility space modernization project, there are really kind of two sub buckets. One is the Judicial Center, and the other is the renovation of the present courthouse.
That's right.
So Andy, you're sort of envisioning those happening simultaneously. We're building the Judicial Center at the same time as we're, I guess, I don't know. I mean, how much renovation we going to be able to do until
they'd have to happen sequentially?
Yes, you'd have to do the Judicial Center first, then move people out of the courthouse in order to be able to renovate the courthouse. But if you do both of those projects early on, you could then bring in some of the outlying activities into that space, and then sell some of the property that we currently own that they are presently on.
Right. Yeah. Agreed with that. Yeah. I mean, if we could sell some of those properties for $3-4 million, then we can really start talking about moving up other projects, right? Or could we? Because those sales proceeds would go into the general fund. So,
well, I think the net effect would be that you would have the projects under your scenario you're proposing happen in the front end, and then you would be selling the other properties shortly after the completion of the new ones, and so you could model that injection in there. But I don't think that allows you to move others later in the program up. Those ones in the middle, if you will, would be predicated on the inflow of the sale of those properties. And if you weren't able to sell the properties either in a timely manner or for the amount anticipated, then it would just those ones that were waiting in the middle may push a little bit further back. I think that would be the net effect if I'm thinking that through correctly.
But the sales proceeds of those vacated properties would go into the general fund, though. They couldn't be spent on SPLOST projects, right?
You can augment SPLOST projects with general fund dollars, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, then I think having space modernization early makes sense to me, because that could seed, then we could sell some of those properties and get some of these SPLOST projects done quicker.
Explain. I mean, what I was imagining also then is if you did it that way, and I would want the attorney to confirm this, but you could then use the SPLOST dollars to repay the general fund for the influx of general fund dollars that you had from selling the out parcels. So you still end up with $195 million SPLOST. You're just mixing some general fund dollars in there in the middle and refunding the general fund with SPLOST dollars at the end. I think you can do that.
Well, and it just introduces, yeah. I mean, then the general fund's at risk until it can be made whole. So it just depends on your unrestricted fund balance and how long. But absolutely, you could do that. I do want to point out, and Commissioner Hamby did bring up the Water Business Office, and I know this has been a matter of discussion, but just for just to be clear, that is an enterprise fund. The sale of that would not go into the general fund, would be my understanding. So.
Well, I think we could, it's my understanding we control the enterprise fund so that we can do with the enterprise fund what we want to do with the enterprise fund.
Well, I defer to the finance or the attorney if they've got any comments on that.
Well, I'll defer to the charter.
If I could jump in on this a little bit. I guess I am cautious. Well, I think this is like some really creative problem solving. I like where this is going. I am cautious of us exploring this too far and committing ourselves to this when it sounds like, these are some decisions that could be completely unmade and we can't rely upon by a future commission about when those actual proceeds are there. And I really don't want us having a plan now that is so dependent upon so many variables that are unknown in the future, which it sounds like this kind of logic is.
And thanks for that, Tim.
I agree. I agree with Commissioner Jensen. I would say I would not predicate moving up projects based on the sale of vacated properties due to space modernization. I would look at it as a bonus. Like, oh, hey, we got a good price selling this thing, so now we can jumpstart this SPLOST project in Tier 4.
And remember, we're talking about probably a high 7 or low 8-figure total from all of that prospective revenue. So we're not talking about $30 million. Maybe we're talking about 8 or 9 or 10 or $11 million total, just in terms of real dollars if we were to sell right now.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
Is the bond beholden to those top 3 projects, or can we use that bond money for other projects? If any of those top 3 projects were to be delayed, could we use that bond money to finance any other projects on the SPLOST list?
I think we were discussing that earlier, and they're beholden to what we borrow against, but right now we've only taken out one bond, so the second bond can be borrowed against anything we want, right?
This is Tom Woodward with First Tryon, and the answer is the bonds. The project use are just dictated by the projects approved from the SPLOST. So any SPLOST-related project, we're fungible which project we fund, again, as long as it's on the SPLOST list.
Okay, so the bond dollars can be applied to any project, not just the ones we intend them to be funded by.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for clarifying that, Melissa. That kind of brings me back then to what I was, I guess, misunderstanding earlier at the beginning of all this. But if we haven't taken, are the zeros that we're seeing next to 1, 2, and 3 assuming essentially on this spreadsheet that all the bond money is going to just those 3 projects?
I think that's right.
Yes, that's the way we just set it up for clarity.
Well, I guess given that that's an option that we can use the bond money for some of these other projects, I'd really like us to be having this discussion with that on the table, because when the public voted for SPLOST, I think the public is generally voting for the 30 plus projects altogether and are primarily much more excited about these $500,000 projects than they are about the judicial center. So, thinking about what the public wanted when they voted for this and what they're going to enjoy seeing getting built first, I'd like to see us have that in the picture when we're talking about having the bond money be part of what we're looking at when we're thinking about what we can move around. And if there's things that are fixed related to the Classic Center or Bethel, then maybe having those on there in a different color so we know we can't move that amount, but having at least the movable amount on there.
Okay.
So, Robert, did you want to do any additional overview of kind of what has moved around in 3 versus 1?
Yeah, that would be good. So this one moves the space modernization back up to the front, even though it shows you see those extra dollars being in quarter 2. Again, they're citing design, planning, approvals, other things starting tier 1 in essence. So we don't, and construction could start probably as early as tier 3 potentially, just depending on how fast the design and all and the approvals move. But the difference in this one, moving that back up again, just gives you a sense of the red and the projects that have to move out. Which, do we have those highlighted, Patty? Yeah, some of the primary ones that moved out in this one. Again, not advocating for it. It's just for discussion. Bishop Park, you heard what Kent said earlier. Bear Hollow, to show you the significance, even with the red in there, that took us moving it all the way to the fourth quarter to get the red even as minimal as we're showing. The recover material processing reuse, moving out substantially to quarters 3 and 4. Mental health is out. Again, I heard you say you wanted to see that one in. And Jackson Street Art Walk project. So those are sizable projects that were moved out and we're still in the red in the middle. And I heard enough conversation to hear that there's several of those you don't want out there. So this is where the challenge comes in to get that guidance to try to figure out how we can balance these tier funding schedules. But really, number 1 was to show you and discuss the projects. 2 and 3 were to show you major movers in there and the impact that they have on the overall spreadsheets.
So, Robert, one question I had just looking at, where a deficit appears in any of them, and maybe this is a question for, some combination of you and David Boyd. So if we look at spreadsheet number 1, for example, so the sort of deficit balloons to close to $30 million in FY26.
Yes.
And then winnows from there. So is there the prospect of authorizing a larger bond or a third one to mitigate that?
And so what this shows is general obligation bonds. We're maxed out, of course, and doing those in tier 2 is where we're estimating to make it meet what's required in the referendum. But I'll let David or Tom, I think, would be the appropriate to speak on going to additional borrowing outside of the general obligation bond, or add to what I said about the general obligation bonds.
Sure. This is Tom Woodward again with First Tryon. So I think we're all got our arms around the limited scope or monies available from a general obligation bond perspective. So for the sake of argument, let's say we tap out all the remaining bonds we could issue associated with that. There are a handful of options that the unified government can do to borrow additional money. Of course, one is the unified government can go back to do a second general obligation bond, which includes a referendum. I know that is sometimes difficult to pass, so that could be a non-starter from that perspective. But to avoid the referendum process, there are really 2 very common financing programs or financing mechanisms that are used here in our state. The first one is to have a local authority issuing as a conduit authority, and they issue bonds and enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the unified government. I've worked with you guys in the past on financing transactions using the Downtown Development Authority or other conduit authorities. And that basically puts the credit, the balance sheet of Athens-Clarke County on the financing. So it's sometimes referred to as a backdoor general obligation bond. And it can be used to pay additional SPLOST-related projects. and SPLOST dollars can be used to help pay those bonds off if SPLOST dollars are available. If SPLOST dollars, for whatever reason, are not available, ultimately it's the general fund that's supporting the transaction. So that's called, again, an intergovernmental agreement or a backdoor GO, and you guys have done that before. Another option for, we'll call it your tier 1 type projects or essential projects, is called lease purchase financing. And that's where we'd utilize an ACCG and enter into a long-term lease. And that lease is subject to annual appropriation. Because it's subject to an annual appropriation, it doesn't constitute long-term indebtedness in our state, which therefore gives you an exemption from having to go through the referendum process. So each year is an automatic renewal unless negative action taken, but the mayor and commissioners would approve that lease each and every year. Having said that, when bondholders or certificate holders buy those bonds, there's a risk of what happens if a government decides not to appropriate 4, 5, 6 years down the road. So typically, those projects are deemed essential, courthouses, jails, et cetera, that the likelihood of a non-appropriation is nil. Conversely, if times got tough and you guys had to make very tough decisions, you may look at cutting access or a lease subject to Parks and Rec. And so bondholders know that there's a risk that that would probably be one of the first things on the chopping block, so not deemed essential on that side. So if we were to look at a lease purchase financing, it would yield toward the more brick and mortar, new construction, essential type projects. So sorry for the long-winded answer, but beyond our GOs that we have issued, there are other financing alternatives to increase your borrowing capacity beyond the GO bonds and utilize SPLOST dollars.
That's helpful. And of course, we're in a dollar value SPLOST environment rather than a time limited one. So I wonder if that would benefit certainty of repayment, given that, when those pennies roll in, these projects are going to happen, whether that happens in 11 and a half years, 11 years and 9 months or 12 years and 1 month.
Yes, sir.
Would any of you kind of advise as to the relative risk or benefit of using either of those financing vehicles?
We would. Both are very strong, very helpful. Ben would have some legal questions related to if we were to go the lease purchase route related to some real estate matters. Looking at it from a financial standpoint, a general obligation bond is going to be your cheapest cost of money. So lowest interest rate, meaning less SPLOST dollars going to the bondholders. The second best option is the intergovernmental agreement. And since it's not a general obligation bond, it's actually deemed a revenue bond through the intergovernmental agreement. And even though it's the same credit, backstop of the unified government, it'll trade 5, 6, 7 basis points higher when we sell the bonds, just because investors see revenue bond versus general obligation bond. And then the spread from that is another 15, 25 basis points for the lease purchase type financing. So to answer your question, if we were to go one of the two routes from an economic perspective, I would encourage the IGA.
Okay, I appreciate it. Melissa, I think I saw your hand.
Yeah, I'm just curious. What is the fallout if the Classic Center Arena were to move to quarter 2? As far as like having that bond money available. This isn't really my wheelhouse, so I need y'all to step in and like just give me a case scenario because the Classic Center has not secured that other funding, and there are still a lot of things up in the air regarding how that arena project is going to be covered. Does anybody have any input on that?
This is Tom Woodward. I'll jump in just with a couple of points from a bond issue perspective. We're in an extremely low interest rate market right now. Obviously, none of us have a crystal ball, so you just have additional time of what interest rates may do in the future, up or down. Nobody really knows. Probably the more relevant one is that, as you guys remember, when we voted in the GO bonds, part of how GO bonds are voted in on our state is that each year we have a maximum amount of principal that may mature on any given year. So to the extent that we push a GO bond out into the future, that just reduces the general obligation, bandwidth that we have. It decreases each and every year. Just like in 2020, one could say that we left a little bit of GO bonding capabilities or capacity on the table. Now, the bond issue, that's just a timing mechanism because obviously this is all being paid off by the SPLOST. So if we did push off a bond issue to another year or another term, that would just, the lower bond par amount would just be supplemented more from the pennies on a pay-go basis. So those are my comments from a bond perspective.
Can I just add? I mean, I think, taking the bonds out of the picture for a moment, Melissa, I mean, I think one thing with delaying the Classic Center is it delays the positive impact it would have on our sales tax revenue, on our hotel motel tax, because obviously the reason we're doing this is because it's an economic development project. And so, if we delay it, the benefits that we would get from that obviously get pushed further out in terms of, more people coming to town and spending time and money in restaurants, maybe staying overnight for an event, that kind of stuff.
And associated employment.
Mayor, I have a question, if you don't mind, too, just based on what your comments were about, are there, in thinking about additional bonding opportunities? And, I don't know did we give JDA, the Joint Development Authority, the bonding capabilities? And does, the Mayor and Commission serve as a redevelopment authority? So I think we have bonding capabilities. I mean, if we're looking at to address, certainly like the library on the east side, I mean, I could certainly see the Joint Development Authority helping us out by bonding that and getting it paid back through the SPLOST dollars within these tiers here. Any, I don't know if Judd around, did we give them that authority to do some bonding?
Well, I think we could, I do think they had that authority. I also think, the Downtown Development Authority has that authority. So
the authority is limited.
Yes.
The Downtown Development Authority is limited.
Yeah,
right.
certain projects have under their authority. I'm sorry. But I think we could work with the Joint Development Authority. I do.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think Judd brings up a good point on that authority financing, that really we have to look closely at the powers. All of the authorities are going to have the ability to issue bonds, but some of them are limited in terms of the types of projects that they can do. So if that's the route we want to go, we have to look closely at enabling legislation and make sure that they have the ability to issue bonds for that particular kind of project.
Well, the downtown's limited in the downtown boundary area, so there is that. But I don't know about the right.
May I ask a couple things?
Go ahead, Jesse.
So one is, I'm wondering if there's a way that we could be sent this totally awesome spreadsheet. So maybe we could tinker with our own little dragging around of projects to kind of work out in our own heads, what we'd like to advocate for and have a better sense of what's possible. Is that?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, that would be
absolutely.
Well, I will say this. It is a pretty intricate spreadsheet, and we obviously don't mind sharing it so that you can move things around. But every spreadsheet that every commissioner turns in, we're going to have to go through and make sure every single cell is reporting directly so that there's no inherent mistake. So, Commissioner Houle, there's nothing we're trying to hold back, but it does complicate. I wish there was an easier way that we could have you just move blocks around, to try to do that. So we'll do that, but it's going to be very careful, at that.
Maybe when it's sent out, if you can just say, maybe some specific instructions on what we can move to not break it.
I think I have to try to keep the debt service repayment in there some way. And so it kind of complicates things a little bit as to if you are going to, right now, the spreadsheets that we have given to you was on the precept that projects 1, 2, and 3 would be the ones that we would bond out. And clearly, with our second or potential third bonding, you could choose or select other projects, that you wanted to carry that bonding. And that's where it gets pretty intricate as far as how you spread it out on the spreadsheet. What I would like and what would help, I think, our department more than anything is knowing how each commissioner prioritizes these projects in their mind, and how if we had the entire budget amount and said, here, Jesse, how do you want to spend this money first? If you could prioritize those projects, that would help us more than anything, because then we could look at every commissioner and how you want to spend the money and try to make everybody happy as much as we can.
So following up on that, Patty, and kind of thinking about what I've heard over the course of the evening tonight, if we use the first spreadsheet sort of as a foundation, certainly heard interest in more renewable energy funds earlier. I heard some interest in mental health earlier, and interest in Vincent Drive earlier. And I heard at least some, but not absolute willingness to move back the MRF. Now those, mental health and Vincent actually together don't even rise to the level of the MRF. So you could really look at just over $1 million of additional renewable dollars kind of moving forward if the MRF was to move back, and those other two, mental health and Vincent, were to move up. Obviously, then there's the question of ensuring that we haven't gone into the red by Tier 4 as currently is conceived on spreadsheet 1. And so I'd certainly be interested in the prospect of looking at how an additional authority facilitated bond could fix that. Would commissioners like to see that as a model?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think I heard Commissioner Hamby volunteer the ADDA to build the Classic Center. Was that correct?
Obviously, we've passed the marijuana ordinance. But
it's in the downtown district, so you're ready to go, aren't you?
It could be possible. I'm not saying it's not possible.
Build it in your own hands.
Yeah. I will say this. I agree with Jesse. I'd like to get a copy of spreadsheet 1, I guess, just to tinker with. I know it makes people nervous, but I think that would be helpful.
Mayor,
but I agree with Kelly about other authorities coming in to help us.
I'm wondering if the Industrial Development Authority would be qualified to bond the MRF. I mean, I understand the dire need at that facility, and it is an expensive project.
Well, I'd also like to say that, what we've talked about, and it's clearly the interest to try to move as much up in the program as possible. And Mr. Woodward has told us ways in which we can borrow even more funds. I just want to be clear, a net effect of that is greater interest expense, which comes at it comes out of the projects. And so earlier discussion we started with was, is renewable energy in or out of the projects? Well, that depends on how much we have to spend on the projects. This isn't a case for interest versus renewable energy. Don't get me wrong there. But what I'm saying is there will be less funds for projects the more interest expense that you pay. And so there's a balance there, and we don't have answers tonight. Nobody does. But there is, as you move, if you borrow more and more and more of the program, you're going to pay more interest expense.
And I guess another overarching big question that I think I share with at least Commissioner Link is, what happens if we move some of these mega projects, the big ones, numbers 1, 2, and 3, at least, to the degree that portions of 1 and 3 are movable. If we move them back by just a couple years, does that allow us to front load a lot more without needing to borrow more? Especially when I say a lot more, I mean a lot more of these like smaller projects that are under $1 million apiece. And just as a side note too, because I feel like this might have been a bit unclear in the previous discussion, but with Beach Haven, all that I think anybody is really looking for there, at least all that I'm advocating for, is the amount we need to kind of get that study done and get it opened up. And so that much larger portion of that project, I think, could get moved even further back to make space for other things to move up farther, such as the sidewalk projects that other commissioners were talking about.
Mr.
Mayor,
Mayor, oh, sorry, I just had a quick question. Can the Solid Waste Enterprise Fund bond for, say, the MERV? Can the enterprise funds bond?
I've looked at a couple of the enterprise funds regarding water and sewer and things of that nature, and usually those funds are pretty limited in the sorts of things that they do. So I don't know if that project sort of falls within its authority.
I'm thinking of the landfill enterprise fund possibly bonding the MERV.
Yeah, the enterprise fund is not a separate entity with bonding authority, so those bonds have to be issued by the United Government, but can be backed by revenues from that project.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, Tim.
Russell, and I think we used, Kelly could correct me on this, but I think we used the Public Facilities Authority to bond some water services stuff and some other things in the past, I believe.
My last two kind of comments is one. I'm also would like to see the spreadsheet just to be able to play around with, but not necessarily to submit to staff, because I think staff is correct that at least half of us will break this spreadsheet when we give it back. But I think maybe a nice compromise, and what I'm hearing from staff's needs is just a clear idea of the prioritization of all this stuff. So possibly if we could just come up with, have something sent out to us where we just simply prioritize every one of these projects as quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, or quarter 4, and hope that we don't just put everything under quarter 1. And possibly then staff could kind of weigh those things to try to see where the most prioritization is at, and just to give a little bit more of a consensus of where the prioritization is. I think that's something that we could do without breaking the spreadsheet. And then my other comment is, I definitely support, because I think it's seeming to me likely, inevitable, that we might have to do another bond. So having our attorneys and staff come back and kind of with a menu of options of some of these IGA bonds, telling us who can do the bonding, what their limitations are, what projects could possibly fall under those limitations, that kind of thing, just to give us kind of what our options would be for that.
Tim, I wonder if just that exercise of really kind of prioritizing everything, we may be past that point, I guess is what I'm saying.
Well, and Mayor, if I might ask Mr. Woodward, and Finance Director David Boyd. So my understanding, so with the SPLOST borrowing, it has to be paid within the SPLOST. And then if we were to do outside bonding, then you could go beyond the SPLOST. But my understanding is that the debt service source, the revenue would come from the SPLOST collections themselves. So the more that you borrow, unless you delay the repayment, more of the revenues coming in the front years would be dedicated towards debt service and less going to other projects. So the net effect is at some point, some projects are pushed all the way out to the end. And, when you get that far out, and a lot of the collections are, well, I'll just leave it at that. Is that dynamic? Is that what would happen here, or is there something different with these outside bonds that you're suggesting?
I guess you're right. Exactly on the GEO bonds and bonds, you'd fill up the bond bucket first with your monthly sales tax coming in to make sure you have enough to pay the debt service, and then anything remaining from that can go to your pay-as-you-go projects for the balance of that called SPLOST year, if you will. The GEO bonds, those are voted in, and so we know we can't go beyond that final maturity. That is set there. With an IGA revenue bond, and Ben, help correct me if I'm wrong on this, on statute laws, we could look at issuing, since it's an IGA, and even though we have SPLOST funds being able to help pay the debt service off on this, the true credit is the general fund of Athens-Clarke County. And so if the mayor and commissioners wanted to look at going beyond the final maturity of the SPLOST, you can look at that. And sometimes you'll see counties or school districts issue a 20-year bond, which is a 5 or 6 year SPLOST, hoping that SPLOST will renew and continue forward. Here in this case, if we were to have an IGA bond go 20 years, just to throw out a number, then we would have to think hard about that, because if the SPLOST is not renewed upon the sunset this time, then that debt would directly fall on the general fund of Athens-Clarke. Ben, just to make certain, I don't like when I quote state laws. Did you see anything wrong with that logic?
No, I agree with that. There's nothing that would limit the term of an intergovernmental contract back deal or one of these deals we've talked about through an authority. Those can be up to 50 years. So that's certainly possible to extend that out beyond the SPLOST term. But you're right. Debt service on that beyond the SPLOST term has to come from someplace else.
Mayor, I would like us to explore that. Certainly, everybody may jump to the computer on me at this one, but if you look at what we're borrowing now, it's half of the SPLOST dollars, and it looks like the debt service on that is the maximum each year of $15 million for that. I mean, we could certainly. Why don't we borrow the other half from using some of these, the intergovernmental agreements like these folks are talking about, and then just use the proceeds. I mean, then you get everything going in quarter one, and then just you see where I'm going with that. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think the front loadings. What folks are definitely looking to do. I would imagine that there's some sort of functional consideration just around how many things can get off the ground at the same time.
Well, yeah, I get that, but you see where I'm going. I mean, I think we ought to explore how we can borrow as much as we can in order to front load, because we've got we know the money's going to come in each year. $15 million to pay back in two debt services. So, I think it's worth exploring.
And Mr. Woodward, Mr. Brooks, just to make sure I understand. So, with the revenue bonds, that the term may extend beyond Tier 12 or the 12th year, then the revenues that would service that debt, you said you would be hopeful that the SPLOST would renew. So are you saying that a potential source of paying those bonds, the revenue, would be a future, the next SPLOST passed?
Yes, that could be, or
the general fund. Either one of those.
The general fund or a future SPLOST, you can pay back. You could have that be one of the authorized purposes for the next SPLOST, is to pay back that existing debt.
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
I'm just going to make one final point now. I'm going to hush because I know we need to move on. But if there's a way where we can work that out and front load a lot of these projects, because like everybody said, all these projects are important, and all these projects impact the quality of life, the economy, the way we provide government service here in this community. And as you get to be 50, you realize how short life becomes, and you'd like to get everything done in quarter one rather than quarter two. Certainly from that standpoint. So if this is possible, I'm serious. I think we ought to really look at it, and that way we do make everybody happy. Thanks.
Thanks, Mike. I want to get any kind of final comments so that staff can then model some of what we've discussed. See, I know I've got a note from Jesse, so go ahead, Jesse, and then I'm just going to kind of circle back to everyone individually, so we can wrap this up. Go ahead, Jesse.
Thank you, Mayor Gertz, and apologies to any viewers who have heard me talk over others. I kind of shared with others in the chat. My connection's really crazy today, so apologies for that. I'm really grateful for all this. I want to kind of echo the comments we've heard most recently about at least exploring other options. I'd love to understand all the options so we can make an informed decision when it comes to further bonding. And if we're going to rank our projects, I really just want to stress the request that we're all asked to rank all of the projects, and that anything in those projects number 1, 2, and 3 that is not like entirely fixed. I would like us to not assume that this body fully agrees. It should be put in right out front. So I just like to ask that be included in whatever future prioritization we're doing. And with that, I'll kick it over to whoever's next in your order.
I'll just go down the line. Russell, anything else?
I feel like this was a good discussion. I think we're close to a consensus based on this discussion. I think we're pretty close to a consensus. Maybe moving back the MERV a little bit and moving up the mental health and the Vincent Drive. So I think we're closer than maybe some folks think. I think we're really close.
Thanks, Russell. Andy?
Well, just a couple of things. I would still suggest that the space modernization stuff is really important. I mean, it was one of the big ticket items, and we decided to place it early for a reason. It's helps us provide services to the public in a more effective and efficient manner. It's not necessarily a sexy project in the way in which some of the others may be, but and I think the Judicial Center, again, that's not something that everybody gets excited about, but it does tie into our criminal justice reform efforts. I mean, if you go to the current courthouse, I mean, you have the accused and victims having to sometimes stand around in the same corridors. You don't have really good places for juries to meet. So I think it's important that we kind of bear some of those broader things in mind. The question I had was, since we're all giving the manager things to do, I would like to know, the best estimate that we have of how much money, unspent money, we would have once all the projects from SPLOST 2011 are constructed. That could then also be used for some of these things that we're talking about here. And I know it's a bit difficult to figure out, but if the manager's office could maybe spitball some based upon what you've heard tonight, spitball some different scenarios in terms of what moving some of the larger projects around may or may not do for our general fund operating costs, because I think that's also something to bear in mind, because what might make sense from the SPLOST schedule may not make sense from the operational funding perspective.
Thanks, Andy. Ovita, anything?
I don't really have anything. I've just been listening. I do think that there are probably people here with much more expertise than I do. So I always just speak from a place of that I'm comfortable with. And I do think that the work that the CAC did on this, we should keep that in consideration as we're prioritizing. We know that there were key key things that was very, very prevalent in the Black community. And I do know that when we have to look at other funds instead of general funds for the things that we have to run a city, I think it's important. So I hope we don't pick this apart. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. I just think we should keep in mind what the CAC had put and how they were prioritized and what programs were prioritized late, and that those issues, the things that we committed to the east side of Athens, we follow through with. And I do know that we're moving ahead, and thankful we're moving ahead with the Bethel project. That's all I have to say.
Thanks, Avita. Any final thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, I look forward to seeing what other partners we can bring into the fold as far as helping us get some financing for this. And I don't know what the time frame on that could look like. I know we're planning on voting in this in January, but I would just encourage us to think big. I mean, if we can find partners that could help us with some of this financing, let's utilize that, and let's get some of these projects done sooner rather than later, and work within that. I think it'll pay off for us, and it'll pay off for the community, and it'll help get some of these things done early. So with that said, I'd like to see that, but I'd also still like to see the spreadsheet to see if we are going to continue doing all these tiers and quarters, to tinker around with that a little bit. I promise not to mess anything up for anybody. So,
thanks, Mike.
Okay, thanks, Kelly.
Patrick,
that would be a first, Mike.
Kelly, one of the things I will say, I do know that Columbia is looking at other finances too, so other resources. So maybe that'll fold in to something that's going to be positive for everybody.
Thanks. Patrick, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, I'd like to thank staff and all the departments for being here tonight and dealing with this 3-hour long work session. But pretty much my colleagues have echoed or stated some of the things that I'm interested in. More financing options, but truthfully, all I care about is the east side. And I'm still gonna beat my horn about the MRF. Anything that saves us money that we can get out the way now, be good. But I like Andy's idea for staff to look at things that make us money, things that save us money, intellectual improvement, and renovate before building. I would like to see the first sheet so I can tick around with it as well. And just to, I hate that sometimes we make decisions that we put politics involved, even though we're technically politicians. But that judicial center was built in, I believe, 1914 or something. And, it's crowded, it's cramped. I've had some of my cousins who unfortunately had to go through there, and they even complained about it. So I think the judicial center may not be popular in the public, but it, as leaders and representatives for not only just our constituents but for the county in the future, we need to focus on the things that need to get done, and that judicial center is one of them. And we can't do the space modernization fully without building that judicial center.
Thanks, Patrick. Mariah?
Thank you. And I also want to thank staff and my colleagues for a really good discussion. I think that a lot of great things were brought up, particularly with breaking out some of these projects into their component parts to think about how we can spread that money out over a longer period of time and get to some things sooner than later. I will echo that I do think the mental health facility is really important. And so I agree with those who have said, who have leaned towards perhaps pushing back the MRF in order to prioritize that project, as well as the Vincent Drive sidewalk. And again, any sort of ways that we can front load some of the more public facing projects. I think people being able to see the benefit of their tax dollars at work will be good. And I think that helping folks with being able to walk to the bus, walk to the park over on Vincent Drive, and also have access to more comprehensive mental health care through funding that facility earlier helps accomplish some of that, as well as making it so that we can get folks out exploring Beach Haven sooner than later. I think the folks on the west side will appreciate that a great deal. And I also want to say thanks to my colleagues for sharing my priority for the East Side projects. I haven't had much to say because the projects that the folks in my district are most concerned about have been well taken care of. And so I want to thank you all for joining in support for those. And that's it.
Thanks, Mariah. Melissa, any final thoughts? Melissa, if you're there, you're muted. All right, Melissa, I'll come back to you if you're still there. Tim?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. And I think I echo just a lot of the same things that my colleagues have said. I think I'm in agreement with Commissioner Hamby here. I mean, the more we talk about this, there's a lot of priorities. And while it might be a little bit more complex, I think we're just going to have to eventually do a revenue bond. And so I want us to start preparing for us to be able to do that. Because I think we need to be able to do the mental health housing project, but also the MRF. I mean, going back to what Commissioner Harrod said, it's going to be costing us money if we put that one off, especially operational costs, but also the Bishop Park pool that's leaking into Normal Town, Vincent Drive. All these things are definitely priorities. And if we can take out this revenue bond, instead of having to stress like crazy and try to squeeze these few things in and having some people be unhappy, if we can take this revenue bond out and kind of fulfill all of these promises in a timely manner, which is what I think our constituents are expecting, plus moving some stuff up that I would love to see moved up, like the Tallahassee Forest, if we could. I think that's the best outcome here. So, yeah, I would love for us the next time we have this work session to really have some options on the revenue bonds shown before us. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Melissa, I see you. Can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I don't know what's going on with my mute. It said I wasn't muted, but apparently I was. Yeah, I think, Tim kind of wrapped it up. I do see the dire need for some of these high ticket items that we're talking about bumping back, like the MRF. I mean, if that facility breaks down, there goes our recycling stream for this community. And we know how much this community prioritizes recycling. So yeah, I feel like our only option is to go for another bond. And yeah, the citizens spoke pretty clearly about the projects that were priorities for them, and those are not necessarily the projects that we've clearly prioritized, these big ticket projects. But we know the need, particularly for space modernization and the judicial center. But those are two things that are interdependent upon one another. We can't even think about space modernization until we have a judicial center built, so we have an empty courthouse to move into and then sell off these buildings. So if we need to prioritize that, then we need to get on determining where that judicial center goes. And from what I understand, this money does not include the land for it. So those are some questions we're going to have to ask.
All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Certainly, there have been some specific projects noted, interest in other financing vehicles, and clearly, some things are not going to happen tomorrow, but there's interest in some things moving closer to the present day rather than a decade out. So, I guess staff, I'll ask you to kind of take what you've heard, explore some of the financing options. Obviously, the idea of using an authority as a conduit is something that's come up again and again. I don't know if you've got a kind of ballpark sense now of kind of how far out this pushes sort of approval of this. Obviously, we're bumping up against the end of the year. And so, if this has to move to what would normally be our January agenda setting session or even February, such as it is. But Robert or Blaine, I don't know if any of you have thoughts right now you want to make note of.
I've got a few, Blaine, if you're okay.
Yes, sir, of course.
All good conversation. I obviously want to sit down with Blaine and talk about a lot of what we discussed and get some direction on some things. I would, in addition to prioritizing things somehow, so I want to work on that a little bit to see if we can get a little more direction on a few of them. And I certainly expected some of the conversation to go to moving everything up front that you could. But in addition to the money, I hope you'll realize that there's only so much staff that can roll these things out. And y'all got to keep in mind yourself the number of work sessions and the concept approvals and the schematic approvals. It's going to be a lot of your time as well to do those things. So just keep in mind the reality of trying to roll these things out. RFPs, user groups, it's pretty monumental. So keep that in mind in addition to the money. And then I did have an offer, and I'd like to see what Blaine thought about this. We would be willing to have you come in and look at the spreadsheets and go over them with you and let you move things around however. And that would give Patty and myself the opportunity to check to make sure that things aren't out of whack. Not that you mess anything up, but a lot of the things are connected. And you know how y'all know spreadsheets better than I do, but there's a lot of equations in there and a lot of things that we have based in there. We would be willing to sit down with you, not to tell you what to do, but to give you that opportunity to have that immediate feedback to make sure that it's accurate if you'd like. But I'll talk to Blaine about that some more as well.
I'd still like to get an email with the spreadsheet attached to it, Robert. We were emailed a spreadsheet when we put these projects together. I'd like an email spreadsheet on this. I know how to operate a spreadsheet, and I think others do as well.
No problem. That's all I had, Blaine. Thank you, Mayor.
I have nothing else, Mayor.
Okay. All right. So, got some work to do. Do encourage any of you who either want to fiddle with the spreadsheet on your own at home or have a facilitated session to avail yourself of that. So for everybody here on staff, I really appreciate all your time. I know you spent a lot of time listening and obviously planning many of these projects from the outset and responding to questions. For Benjamin and others on the outside, we appreciate you being here tonight. It's helpful to have your expertise. And so with that, we'll go ahead and end the public session. Everybody, please have a great night. Do want to note, I think this is Commissioner Harrod's last evening on camera here. So Commissioner Harrod, we had fond farewells for you last week, but everybody take a screenshot right now. This is the face that you have come to love for 14 years. And you're going to have to only get it in person here on out. So, Andy, thanks a lot.
He's broke my camera. That's why I'm not on camera.
Thank you, Kelly. I appreciate it.
All right. And public farewell. We're going to move into executive session. Staff, thanks again.